In April 2019, a Boeing 777 sat on the tarmac for 7 hours. It wasn't hacked. Nothing on board was broken. Every GPS satellite above it had just decided it was 1999. It wasn't one plane. That same weekend, as many as 15 Boeing 777s and 787s were delayed or canceled in China. A KLM 777 bound for Bogota left Amsterdam about 7 hours late. And it wasn't only aviation. New York City's municipal wireless network, the one its emergency services lean on, went down. On the other side of the planet, Australia's Bureau of Meteorology couldn't launch its weather balloons because the radiosondes strapped to them had stopped knowing what day it was. 4 systems, 4 countries, nothing in common. No hack, no hardware failure, and 31 satellites overhead, all working exactly as designed. That's what makes this one worse. Because GPS isn't really a map. It's a clock. Position is just what you get for free when you have 31 atomic clocks in orbit and you're very, very good at subtraction. So every satellite has to broadcast the time, and the way it broadcasts the date is the whole story. It doesn't send April. It doesn't send 2019. It sends 2 numbers, how many seconds into the week it is, and how many weeks have passed since one fixed starting line. That starting line is midnight, January 6th, 1980, week 0. Every GPS receiver on Earth counts from that same instant, which means the date your phone shows you isn't a date at all. It's a count. And a count has to live somewhere. In the original civil GPS signal, that week count lives in a field exactly 10 bits wide. 10 switches, on or off. 10 bits can hold 1,024 different values. 0 through 1023. That's it. That's the whole vocabulary. And for years, it just counts. Week 400, week 900. Every switch flipping up one at a time, exactly the way it should. Until all 10 of them are on. 1023. Every bit high. The field is completely full. Then, another week goes by, and the counter has to add 1. But there's no 11th switch, so it doesn't roll to 1024. All 10 bits flip back to off, and the count reads 0. 1024 weeks. That's 19 years and 8 months. Then, back to 0, and it starts over. This isn't a bug that got in by accident. Nobody typoed it. Nobody skipped a code review. It was specified in the 1970s by engineers who knew exactly what they were doing and who could not possibly have imagined that in 20 years' time, a hospital, an airline, and a weather bureau would all be quietly betting on their 10 little switches. So here's the part that should bother you. April 2019 was not the first time this happened. The counter rolled over once before, on the 21st of August, 1999. Same overflow, same drop back to 0, same 20-year fall. And almost nothing happened. A few receivers got confused. Some surveying gear needed a firmware update. There were a handful of news stories, mostly filed next to the Y2K coverage, and then everyone moved on. Why? 3 reasons, and they all say the same thing. In 1999, GPS was still mostly a military system with a civilian side attached. Very little that could hurt you depended on it. Aviation had barely started certifying it, and critically, most receivers in the field had been built recently enough that the assumptions baked into them still happened to be true. The system got away with it. Not because it was safe, because there wasn't enough writing on it yet. And that's the trap. The reason 1999 stayed quiet is the exact reason 2019 hurt. Because in the 20 years between them, GPS stopped being a convenience and became infrastructure. Timing for cell networks, timestamps for power grids and trading floors, navigation certified for commercial flight, and this time, everybody saw it coming. GPS.gov published a rollover notice. The Department of Homeland Security put out its own advisory. The FAA issued an Information for Operators Bulletin, INFO 19-005, specifically about it. Honeywell sent a service letter to its customers about the flight management systems it builds. Months of warning, a date circled on the calendar. The exact second was known. 23:59 and 42, UTC, on the 6th of April, 2019. The GPS week number that night was 2047. In a 10-bit field, 2047 reads as 1023. Full. One more week, and it rolled to 0. And the receivers that hadn't been patched did the only thing they could. They looked at the number, applied a 20-year-old assumption about what it meant, and reported a date from a completely different decade. In China, Honeywell flight management units that hadn't taken the update started throwing navigation errors, and 777s and 787s stayed on the ground. In Amsterdam, a KLM 777 pushed back about 7 hours late. NYCWIN fell over. Australia's radiosondes stopped launching. Every one of those operators had been warned. But a warning isn't a patch. A patch is somebody, somewhere, taking a certified avionics box out of service and flashing new firmware into it, and then doing that a few thousand more times before a specific Saturday night. So let's get to the actual failure, because it is not in the sky. The satellite did exactly what the specification told it to do. It transmitted 0. And 0 was correct. The count had genuinely gone back to the start of a new cycle. There is no bug in that number. The bug is in the question the number can't answer. 0 weeks since when? Because a 10-bit field can tell you where you are inside a cycle, it cannot tell you which cycle you're in. That information was never transmitted. It doesn't exist in the signal. So every receiver has to supply it from memory. The way they do that is called a pivot. When a receiver is built, the manufacturer burns a reference date into it. Effectively, if the week number I receive is below such and such, assume we're in the next cycle. Otherwise, assume we're in this one. It's the same trick a 2-digit year uses. If I tell you 85, you decide whether I mean 1985 or 2085, based on an assumption you're carrying, not on anything I actually said. And a pivot works beautifully, for about 20 years. Then the cycle turns over, the assumption expires, and the receiver applies it anyway. It has no way to know it's stale. So it takes a perfectly correct 0, adds the wrong cycle, and lands roughly 1,024 weeks in the past. 19 years and 8 months gone. For a lot of the boxes that failed in 2019, that meant a clock reading somewhere back in 1999, the previous rollover, not literally 1980. The epoch is the start line. The fall is one cycle. Which leaves you with the sentence this whole story reduces to. The counter did its job. The assumptions wrapped around it did not. So, is it fixed? Sort of. And the sort of is the interesting part. Modernized GPS signals carry a different navigation message called CNAV. And in CNAV, the week number field isn't 10 bits, it's 13. 3 extra switches doesn't sound like much, but bits don't add, they double. 10 bits gave you 1,024 weeks. 13 bits gives you 8,192. About 157 years. The next CNAV rollover lands somewhere around the year 2137, which, for anyone alive today, is genuinely solved. Except the old 10-bit signal is still being broadcast. It has to be, because the receivers listening to it are still out there. And they're not the kind of thing anyone swaps out. They're avionics certified decades ago, where changing the firmware means reopening a certification. They're timing racks in the back of buildings. They're buoys and seismic sensors and survey gear that nobody is going to physically visit. A 10-bit receiver keeps counting to 1023 no matter what the modern signal says. And 1024 weeks after April 2019 is the 20th of November 2038. The wall didn't disappear. It just moved. And it's already on the calendar. And once you've seen this shape, you start seeing it everywhere. 2 digits for the year, that was Y2K. A minute with 61 seconds in it, that was the 2012 leap second, and it took down half of the internet's Linux servers. 10 bits for the week, that's this. 32 bits for the second, that's 2038. Every one of them is the same failure. Somebody chose a field just big enough for the world they could see. And the world outlasted the field. But here's what makes time bugs different from every other kind. A normal bug is a surprise. These aren't. The detonation date is public, exact, and known decades in advance. You can put it in a calendar invite. In 2019, we did. Governments published it, regulators bulletined it, manufacturers shipped the patch, and the jets still didn't fly. One clock added a single second and grounded airlines. One ran 20 years fast and did the same. And there's a third counter running right now inside almost everything you own, with its own date already set. 3:14 and 7 seconds a.m. January 19th, 2038. 10 months later, in November, GPS does this all over again. Same year, 2 different clocks. Nobody planned that. The 2038 story is here. And if you want the one where a single extra second took down half the internet, start there instead. Subscribe for your weekly dose of post-mortem analysis and the exciting tech breakthroughs changing our world.